Joining us right now is former U.S. Army Intelligence Officer Andrew Peek. Andrew, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. How do you see the relationship right now? What do you think needs to happen to repair relations with Russia?
Well, I think saying that relations are at an all-time low is a little bit hyperbolic, right? I mean, the Cuban Missile Crisis was a big low.
Good point.
That's exactly. Yeah. You basically read my thought bubble.
Yeah, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, you know, the Berlin airlift. I think it says something to the depth of the divide between the U.S. and Russia that with the most potentially pro-Russian president in history, or at least in modern history since the end of the Cold War, the U.S. and Russia are at the same loggerheads they were under Obama and under Bush and under Clinton and so forth. So, look, I'm not sure anything can repair the relationship with Russia. They want to hang on to Assad. They want to have freedom of action in Eastern Europe, and we want to prevent that.
Andrew, I mean, you're talking about the two places that have the largest stockpile of nuclear. And so we have to make sure that we, even though they're adversary, that we get along and we figure out how to play in the sandbox to the best of each other's ability. How do you start getting there?
Well, look, I think that's part of Tillerson's mission, right? Tillerson's over there to play the good cop to Nikki Haley's bad cop at the UN. You know, he's not saying regime change. He's clearly there with a message about Assad personally and Assad's family, and also the future use of chemical weapons. So what I would suspect Tillerson is saying to him is, hey, look, we don't mind having someone in this regime running the country in the future. We don't even mind having a major U.S. presence in the country in the future. What we do mind is having Assad personally there. So I think coming to a détente on Syria is an important first step on that.
Andrew, one of the big news events yesterday didn't happen in Moscow. It happened when President Trump said, actually, I believe in NATO now. And actually, I support NATO, and NATO's strong. What do you make of that stance and that turn and what it says about the Russia-U.S. relationship going forward?
Boy, you know, the best thing in Washington is when the swamp creatures start being nice to you, you know? So, no, again, I mean, I think it speaks to the permanence of U.S. national interest, that once you become the president, you realize that these alliance structures are really important. And I think also they have learned a little bit to speak the correct words, you know, in diplomatic jargon, how to reassure NATO allies without necessarily committing yourself to a major course of action. But certainly both the President and the Secretary of State over the last 2 weeks have said a lot more things that make our NATO allies comfortable.
Let's move on to North Korea. Things feel like they're getting real dangerous out there. Take a look at this satellite imagery suggesting that the nation is preparing for a sixth nuclear test, possibly to coincide with the 105th anniversary of the birth of the state founder, Kim Il-sung, on Saturday. President Trump told me earlier in the week that he expects China's leader, Xi Jinping, to cooperate on stopping the nuclear threat from the Hermit Kingdom. They're doing a deal. If China helps the U.S. on that, perhaps they get better terms on trade. Listen to this.
But I think China can help us. I hope China can help us. We talked about trade, and I can tell you China will do much better on trade if they help us with North Korea.
And you think he knows that?
I think he knows that. I told him that, yeah.
Is trade policy enough to convince China to actually do something concrete?
Well, you know, there have been two really interesting articles appearing in the state-run press in China. One telling North Korea, a close Chinese ally, to avoid provocations when these U.S. warships are near it. The second one saying that North Korean nuclear tests are a strategic embarrassment for China and potentially a danger to Beijing itself, not just the United States and the region. So I think there's definitely the emergence of a second narrative within China and within the Chinese government that there may be that North Korea is not necessarily the strategic asset they thought it was, and yet there might be room to cooperate with the U.S. in finding a more permanent solution.
And read into this. For what it's worth, China sent some North Korean freighters loaded with coal back to North Korea and then turned around and placed orders for coal with the United States. So at least that, in terms of trying to parse China's actions. And then on top of that, with the USS Carl Vinson and the strike group there moving to the Korean Peninsula, it's expected that at least Japan moves warships into the region to join forces with the United States. So there's a lot happening and a lot of incremental steps in terms of putting pressure on North Korea from our allies and China.
But are there more levers, really? I mean, the rap on the Chinese have always been they rhetorically can ramp it up, but they don't really press the levers. They'd rather have that regime there than a united Korean peninsula. Are there more levers they can be pulling and should be pulling?
Well, of course, and in fact, this is why historically Korea has often been divided, because it's in an area where there's competing great powers like China, like Japan, like oceanic powers like the United States, and they each want a piece of it. So certainly, yes, there's more levers the Chinese could be pulling. I think the coal embargo is such a huge piece because coal is 90% of North Korea's export income. So any time that cash flow, which North Korea doesn't have a lot of, is restrained, you're going to see serious behavioral changes from the Kim regime.
So do you expect anything out of these, military drills in South Korea this morning? I mean, do you expect what will be the impact?
Well, I think the most dangerous moment is April 15th, which is a big day in North Korea because it's Kim Jong-un's birthday.
This Saturday.
This Saturday, exactly. And they I suspect he celebrates his birthday a little bit differently than we do in the United States. No, I think we are closer to a military confrontation in North Korea than we have been since Kim Jong-un took power in 2012.
When President Trump talks about the trade and currency manipulation with respect to China, I don't think that's really the carrot that gets anything, because when U.S. had the sanctions on Russia, China immediately did an oil deal with Russia. When we had it with Iran, they did a deal with Iran. So at the end of the day, China is a global player. They're going to move and navigate and meander to wherever is best for them. But I think it's all about the idea of not wanting this confrontation to take place in the South Seas. So
absolutely, not least because any confrontation with North Korea gives us an excuse to strengthen our military allies in the Pacific Rim, particularly Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, elsewhere. Ordinarily, the Chinese would have a lot of reason to complain about that and gain some sympathy in the region. But if it's right in the wake of a North Korean nuclear provocation, then the sympathy's with us.